So it's ironic that I'm the last one and I have to go quickly, and you'll see why in a second, given what my topic is. You've read the bios. My name is Ari Wallach. I'm adjunct professor at Columbia University, mostly teaching on the future of governance, public policy, and AI. My company, Synthesis Corp, we're here in New York, Washington, Geneva, and mostly now we're working with international NGOs, large foundations, and organizations on helping them kind of think about the long term. And so what I want to go over quickly, so I don't keep getting the countdown, is what it is that we do and why it's slightly different. And it's great, because this has been an amazing series of conversations that we've heard. I'm looking forward to being in the conversation with you all tonight. But it's my firm belief as a futurist, if you will, that the most important thing we can do right now is solve major wicked problems in a way that gets our species in a thriving manner to the 22nd century. That is my only goal whenever we take on new clients. If they don't measure up against that metric, we don't work with them. It doesn't always mean we take on, save the earth types. We work with big corporations, but in that first meeting or that first dinner, if they're not willing to go the distance and work on that very issue, we don't work with them. So what is the problem we want to solve for? Now you'll see why it's ironic, right? Short-termism. So the issue is, from where I sit, if we're going to tackle these major wicked problems, we have to solve for this issue a priori of every other, if we're working on the 17 SDG goals at the UN, which we are, if we don't solve for this, we won't go any further. I met, when I used to meet with CEOs when I first started this 20 years ago, I said, how far out do you want to go? And they were like, I don't know, let's talk 15, 20 years out. I met with a CEO in July, and I said, how far out do you want to go? And he said, 6 months? And I was like, well, you mean for the contract? He goes, no, like thinking. I'm willing to go out 6 months. And so here's the issue. Here's what short-termism does. Short-termism doesn't let the CEO invest in expensive safety equipment, so we get the Deepwater Horizon. Short-termism doesn't let teachers spend quality one-on-one time with their students. So every 26 seconds, someone drops out of high school in America. Short-termism doesn't let Congress pass a deep, true infrastructure bill, so we get the collapse of the I-35 bridge over the Mississippi and 13 are killed. It wasn't always this way, right? We did the Panama Canal. We pretty much have eradicated global polio. We built the Transcontinental Railroad. This was all, the Marshall Plan. And we did women's suffrage. We've done this. We know how to do this. We know how to think and act long, but we've lost it. And so what ends up happening is we persecute people who are trying to flee to a safer place. We sign bills where we take low-level drug offenders and we put them away for life, and we build McMansions without thinking about how people are going to get from them to their work. So what this is what we call the Sandbag Strategy. So more often than not, what will end up happening is we know the river rises every season, but instead of actually working on the levees, we just put sandbags in place. And so this Sandbag Strategy becomes endemic to all of the policy, to all the issues that we're trying to tackle. Now, here's the thing. We've come up with a practice, and it's a practice. It's not this one and done. It's not a strategic off-site planning where you go and you do it with a bunch of cool Post-it notes, right? And then 2 weeks later, you totally forget about it because we know where that goes. So longpath is a practice that's really made up of 3 different ways of thinking. And it's not just for our corporate or our UN clients. It's something that, and we can go into in the Q&A, that I practice with my 3 kids, right? So it's not this thing that's solely meant for up here. So the first and potentially most important component of longpath is transgenerational thinking. So I studied philosophy as an undergrad, and then I was thinking about going to rabbinical school, and I couldn't do it because I didn't want to do brisses and weddings and stuff like that. So, but if you don't know what a bris is, that's why you're laughing. And if you don't, come ask me that later. And so here's the deal. You look at Plato and Socrates and even Heidegger and Habermas, and what we end up doing is when we think about what it means to live a good and a virtuous life, more often than not, we put it in this unit of measure between birth and death, between our own individual life cycle. Think about the entire self-help section of a bookstore, right? It's all about you and your life. Now, what ends up happening is when we look at these kind of major wicked problems that we're trying to solve for, we stack them all on top of us. But what we do know in this kind of long path practice is that these are going to take a really long time. And by that I mean 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Some of these were also obviously decades in the making. So what long path allows us to do, and what really transgenerational thinking pushes us to do, is to think about working in these problems in a way that goes beyond our own life. And we can talk about that in the Q&A. This is obviously informed by Ernest Becker and the denial of death. The feeling has always been that if we solely think about it within our own life cycle, we will not be able to tackle these. The second is futures thinking. You guys, I think everyone has pretty much covered this, but I want to put a slightly different spin on it. So when we think about today and we think about the future, it's always a single point that's out there. But that single point, that lens, is more often than not defined by the particular dominant worldview of the time. Right now, that's obviously technology. It wasn't always that way, right? The ancients had their own worldview, and it wasn't technology that informed how they thought about tomorrow. The church obviously had their own way about what tomorrow was, and your way of actually potentially even buying your way into it. Now, luckily for us, scientific revolution and the Renaissance came along and kind of took some of that power back from the high priests. Now, what ended up happening, though, is we ended up giving that to the high priests of Silicon Valley. Now, here's the thing. I love technology. It impacts everything we do. Everything in my home has AI or something. You say anything and something just starts talking to you in my home. It's not, except my kids. They never talk to me. Again, I love technology. The issue, and by the way, I'm not saying we give it to this guy back. I don't want to necessarily go in that direction. What I'm advocating for is a much more nuanced, and we just heard this in a couple of the talks, a much more nuanced way of thinking and going from the future as a single point to thinking about futures, which is why more often than not we don't use the term future in our work. We use futures. The idea behind that is twofold. One, to drive agency back into the process, both for the individual, for society, and for civilization. And the second part is, yes, it's tech, but science and faith and art and culture, all these other kind of lenses we need to put back on the table if we want to open the aperture of what's possible. The final thinking modality is telos thinking. So this is where I get into a lot of hot water with people. So I'm an Enlightenment thinker. I'm not in the canon, but I'm in that headspace where I actually think it's okay to have a meta-narrative of where you want to go. Telos, the Greek word of purpose, right? We've lost that as a species and as a society, and we've actually lost it in the past couple of months, to be more specific. But it's really to what end, right? And the question is, when was the last time you asked yourself that when you were facing a major decision? So whenever we're working, right now one of our main clients is the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. So whenever we're facing a major issue, we work with them here at our offices in New York and Geneva, my pushback is always to what end? Because it's a very dangerous question. Because what ends up happening is people will say something, and I'll say, well, push that out further, push that out further, push that out further. And I won't get into refugee policy right now, but really the way we're pushing this, what long path thinking and the practice pushes you to do, is to think about this not in terms of the next 6 months or even 6 years, but thinking out 40, 50 years in a kind of post-Westphalian stance, but then acting on it today and laying the groundwork for that. Now, Telos is great, and really kind of in some ways, and this is obviously the Odyssey, Homer's epic, and this is Odysseus. And what Odysseus had as his telos was Ithaca. And my main argument in this way of thinking is that as a species, as a society or civilization, however you want to frame it, we have lost Ithaca. And anytime anyone wants to put that out there, they immediately bat it down, and we can go into postmodernism and everything else in the Q&A. But without a telos, we're not going to move forward, right? And this was Thomas Kuhn. This was the Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which a lot of people are nodding and love the book. Super important book, paradigm shift. More important than the term paradigm shift was what he said about how you actually get people to shift, which is unless they have a strong vision, a strong narrative of what they're shifting to, unless the frog sees the next lily pad, they don't jump, we don't shift. And we've stopped as a society putting that out there. Obviously, the high priests of Silicon Valley do that all the time, and I'm not knocking that. But what I am saying is, in other areas, we're so consumed by technological evolution And then we put those images out there that we've stopped thinking about moral evolution and what does that look like and what does that world look like. Now, we're bombarding you with a lot of stuff tonight. So these are the Longpath Labs megatrends that we use. So Longpath Labs is obviously the subsection of Synthesis Corp where we work with our clients who are willing to think out to the 22nd century. So we use these megatrends. These are decades in the making and going out several decades to help frame the conversation. You'll see science and technology is obviously up there, but it's not the only one, right? So our job is to kind of open that up so that people are exposed to different megatrends when they're thinking about those possible futures. And if you send an email to Amy totally has it with the Dropbox. I'm definitely not that technically sophisticated. I would send you to like, God knows what, like recipes or something. Send an email to megatrends@longpath.org. What you just saw on the previous slide will come back to you. And I could go on and on and on, but I want to make sure we have time for Q&A. Thank you.